Welcome to the Living Life with Wendy podcast. I am so honored to have Bethany Corbin joining me today, who is a health care innovation and Femtech attorney and is on a mission to help thought-leading companies revolutionize the global women's health sector. She is the founder of Feminovation, which helps founders, clinicians, politicians, and advocates transform and disrupt standard core delivery for women's health through specially tailored legal and educational programs, thought leadership, and advocacy. Bethany is a recognized leader at the intersection of women's health, law, and technology, and was named a top 200 trailblazing leader in women's health and femtech by Women of Wearables. Her strategic insights have been featured in top new outlets, including Forbes, Fortune, BBC, NPR, BuzzFeed, The Atlantic, Vice, Cosmopolitan, Teen Vogue, and more. I can't tell you how honored I am to have Bethany joining us today on the Living Life with Wendy podcast. All right, Bethany, thank you so much for joining me today. Like I said, it's such an honor to have you on my podcast. You're so accomplished. And I think my viewers or my listeners would really like to hear a lot about your journey, right? Your story and what got you to where you are today. So please, you have the stage, Bethany.
Thank you, Wendy, so much for having me on the show today. I'm so excited to be here and definitely happy to share my journey because it's not one that was very linear. And I think, so many of us feel like we have to have it figured out, especially at this stage in our lives. And I didn't. So I actually started my career. I'm a lawyer by background. And I started my career in financial services and litigation, actually, something totally different from healthcare. And I absolutely hated it. I can't tell you how distraught I was working in the big law field and not feeling like I was making a difference. And so I ended up moved to DC. I did a DC circuit clerkship and really started digging into what did I want to do with the rest of my life, because this clearly wasn't it. And then this was all there was to being a lawyer. Then clearly I'd picked the wrong profession. So I had always been very interested in healthcare because my mom has had a health illness ever since I was a child, and I was her primary caregiver at age 7. My dad had to actually switch states to take another job when we lost her income. And so I was really integrated into the healthcare system. I had watched medical gaslighting occur from a young age, and I thought, this is something I want to explore. So very interesting fact, even though I had been a lawyer for 4 or 5 years, nobody would hire me in the healthcare law field because I didn't have any healthcare law background, even though I had general legal background, no healthcare law background. So actually had to go and do a healthcare LLM while I was working full time to really bridge that knowledge gap. Went into big law in Washington, DC, worked in healthcare for a while, and then got what I thought was my dream job in academia. So I went to be a law professor, was loving it, came across the term Femtech, which is a relatively new term that probably a lot of people haven't heard of. Came across that term in about 2018, and I was doing totally unrelated research, and I got really excited about it. And I started digging in, and I realized that nobody in the legal field was talking about it. And so the more I looked at it, the more I thought, you know what, it's great being in academia, but I don't want to think about Femtech on just the theoretical level. I want to actually help startups and founders get their products to life. So ended up leaving academia, going back into big law, continued to work in healthcare, started to build out a little bit of a Femtech practice. And then as fate would have it, had my own women's health issue. Very unexpectedly, got diagnosed at an annual physical exam. And that catalyst really pushed me to understand what patients go through, right? Because I had been an observer, I'd worked with startups, I'd worked in healthcare, but I'd never really been a patient. So as I navigated that journey, I was shocked at the statistics I was finding, at the treatments or lack of treatments that we had, the lack of knowledge, the lack of data. And I said, I've got to help startups bring more products into the field so we can revolutionize women's healthcare. And so that was really the catalyst for coming in and creating Feminovation and being an attorney working in women's health.
So as you mentioned, Bethany, there may be a lot of listeners that don't know what Femtech is, right? So can you enlighten us? And just as a side, Bethany is based out of North Carolina or South Carolina, Bethany?
North Carolina.
North
But
Carolina.
you're not wrong,
So in
we're
the
actually
US.
right on the border.
Right. So in the US, but I think a lot of the similar, obstacles and struggles we would also experience in Canada. So can you explain to my listeners really what Femtech is?
Absolutely. Happy to do that. It's a relatively new term. So it wasn't even coined until 2016. So we're not talking about something that's been in existence for a long time. And there's no real universally accepted definition of it. But to me, what it means is any type of digital health solution that's geared towards promoting, enhancing, or revolutionizing women's healthcare. And so it doesn't have to be a female-specific disease, but it could be also diseases that impact women differently. For example, we're seeing a lot of innovation right now in the cardiology space because heart attacks and the symptoms that women experience are so different than what men experience. And so that's really what Femtech is trying to do, is to drive not only innovation in women's healthcare, but also knowledge and helping women themselves understand their bodies, understand that it's okay and it's necessary to be your own advocate. And then they're really also trying with the products that are coming on the market to reduce and really kind of remedy the gender data gap that we have in healthcare, because we don't have a lot of healthcare data on women. And so that's why, when women present with different systems, the medical system's not trained to handle it. And so that's really kind of the purpose of Femtech, is to empower women to understand their bodies, empower different, medical fields to understand that women's bodies are different, bridge that gender data gap, and then also drive innovation in women's healthcare.
Okay, that is a lot to absorb, right, for the listeners. So, as an expert in that field, because I think this is a really interesting episode, because to your point, Bethany, there's women health issues that are really hard to navigate, right? So, because, it just happens. So what would your advice be to our listeners out there when they're I'm going to say in the storming stages of advocating for themselves, and when they're experiencing some health issues that are women specific? What would you advise them to do?
One of the first things that I always tell any woman who's going through something, right, is know your own body, because you know better than any doctor what's normal for you, what your body typically acts like. And if something's wrong or something's not your normal, then that is enough of a reason to go and seek out medical advice. I can't tell you how many times I work with women who say, I don't want to bother my physician. It's probably nothing, right? We downplay our own symptoms. I did it for my women's health issue, and we have a tendency to downplay it. And, that's part of the historical, situation that women have been in, where we've been told it's in our heads, right? Or we've been told that our, pain doesn't matter. And so for that, I really say, know your body. And if something's wrong, you're not bothering your physician. This is what they went to medical school for. And if somebody is dismissing you, or you feel like they're not taking your concerns seriously, or not giving you a test that you think that you need, go for a second opinion. Find somebody else in that field. I've heard so many stories during my time about women who thought something was wrong with their body, but because of their age, right, or their symptoms, they didn't exactly line up with some of the more prevalent diseases. And so oftentimes the providers would say, you're too young to have that, right? Or, you don't have this characteristic symptom that we know belongs to that disease, so we're not even going to test you for it. They would then kind of wait a few months, continue to struggle with the disease, with the pain, with the other symptoms that accompanied it, and then would get a second opinion. And ultimately, regardless of, what they were diagnosed with, right, whether it was endometriosis or cancer even, what most of them told me was that they finally felt relief and validation. There was of course, the fear that goes along with the diagnosis, but after being dismissed so many times, they felt that validation. And so really knowing your body, knowing exactly, that you are your own advocate. And sometimes physicians don't know best. There are some great physicians out there if you do have medical issues. And sometimes it can just take a while to find the right one. So don't feel like you're bothering them. Don't feel like you're going to hurt their feelings if you have to go somewhere else, because ultimately it's your body. So being the advocate, that's the best thing that you can do for yourself. And I know that it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. So and that is such an interesting no, it's a very informative piece of advice for the listeners. So let's talk about feminovation and how does your company help women in this process?
Yeah, so Femtech is really designed on 4 pillars, right? Our first is we want to help founders. We want to get more of these products to the market faster so that we can help more women. So for that aim, we're really focusing on business and strategic advice for female founders, legal support, and different types of consulting services. But we believe that women's health is much more than just helping founders get the advice that they need. We also believe that to drive meaningful change in women's health, what we have to do is change the way that society even thinks about women's health. And so to do that, we're focused on educational programs. So educational programs, not just for founders, obviously we do those as well, but for clinicians who may not know what's going on in the femtech industry. One of the startling statistics is that menopause training for healthcare professionals, they maybe get 4 hours of training total for menopause in their entire medical careers. So really helping them to get more training that they need on women's health conditions, showing how they can interact with femtech founders to actually build products that then the data can be clinically meaningful and used in clinical settings. So that's kind of the second pillar we focus on. And we also do education for the general public, for women who want to know more about, their own bodies, their own health, what's going on, what are we seeing in this field? How can they enhance, the data that's going downstream for researchers? So we do a lot for women as well. The other aspect that we focus on, that we're really excited about bringing is kind of a one-stop shop for founders and clinicians and investors to get all of the resources that they need to build their companies, to collaborate in this space, to get more funding into women's healthcare. Women's healthcare right now gets about, and it differs depending on who you ask, but about 2 to 4% of total healthcare research and development funding. And that's it. So we don't have a lot of funding going to women's healthcare. And right now, of course, we're in an economic downturn for digital health funding. And so it's harder than ever to get that funding. So that's kind of the third aspect that we want to focus on, is really enhancing the dollars that are going into women's health solutions. And then our fourth aspect that we're hoping to build out in 2024 is a way for consumers to actually vet the femtech products that are on the market. Because there's the thing, right? There's dozens of, ovulation, fertility tracking, menstrual tracking apps, different femtech products that are coming to the market, but no standardization in terms of how do I know that this one's handling my privacy and my data properly? How do I know that this one's even backed by medical or scientific accuracy standards? So what we want to do is make that easy for consumers to say, hey, you know what? Here's an app. I'm getting legitimate information on my conditions, but I'm also able to see what femtech products are out there addressing these concerns. And oh, by the way, okay, these 5 do a great job of privacy. Oh, these 5, not so much, some type of standard. That's really what we're hoping to develop going forward.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack from all of that. So I have so many follow-up questions for you, Bethany, and I know you're prepared to answer these too. So let's first talk about the data privacy, because I know that a lot of people have that on their mind right now. And there's a lot of worry out there, right, about what's shared on the internet and how they gather our data. So what is the future of data privacy for women's health specifically?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because data privacy hasn't, it's been something that's gotten attention over time, but in healthcare, it's been something where consumers have been very willing to make the exchange of their data for these algorithmic predictions, right? Or for whatever, healthcare support they're going to get in order to have more control over their care and their wellness. And so that was always very interesting to me, kind of from the start, seeing how healthcare in general, how consumers were very willing to make that trade. Really, we've started to see a shift in women's healthcare specifically. And of course, in the US, we had the overturn of Roe versus Wade with the Dobbs decision last year. And that's been a huge catalyst. And we've seen this rippling also into other countries and other jurisdictions. But now women, much more than ever, are more attuned to what's happening with their privacy and their data in these applications in a way that we've never seen before in healthcare. So a lot of women right now are very much attuned to the fact that they're giving sensitive data, sometimes reproductive health data that they otherwise normally wouldn't give to applications. And depending on where you live, right, in your jurisdiction and the privacy laws there, that data may or may not be protected. In the US, for instance, there's a huge misconception that our Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, which is kind of like our main healthcare privacy act, that it protects women's health data in these applications. Huge misconception. Most of the time it doesn't. And so depending on where you're located and where the company is located and the rules that they're following, your data may not be getting the protection that you think it has. Oftentimes what we're seeing these companies do, and it's not just in Femtech, but the issues are heightened in Femtech because of the sensitive nature of that healthcare data that you're giving in a way, right, that before you would never give somebody that type of reproductive health data, right? So it's a little bit different there. But what we're seeing companies do as an additional revenue stream is selling that data downstream. And they'll sell them, to data brokers, to different companies. We see right now a lot in the news about selling data to Facebook or to Google. And that allows your health data to get out. And once it's out, there's no getting it back. So that's one of the main things that I talk to consumers about a lot is, which app should you be using? I always say, the privacy policies that nobody reads, I get it. There's some statistic out there that says if you read every privacy policy that you ever had to agree to, it would take 7 years of your life away. So I know people aren't reading them. I'm a lawyer, right? I don't read them all. But if you want to know, look at the disclosure section of the privacy policy. Just scroll down, take a quick look at that disclosure section, because it should tell you how they're disclosing it downstream to third parties. And that's what you want to be really careful of and make sure that you're comfortable with.
Okay, because that was going to be my question, follow-up question as a consumer, how can we protect ourselves, right? So just to reiterate, if you can't read all of the privacy policy, go to the disclosure section as a consumer to protect yourself, because I do think that's a real scary place to be, right? Especially when you're using Femtech to monitor some of the things that you're as a woman, right? So yeah, I could see where that could really actually stop people from using a great tool that could really help them.
And that's exactly the problem that we're starting to see, especially, in the US with our reproductive health landscape right now. After the Dobbs decision came out, hundreds of thousands of women deleted their period tracking apps and their Femtech apps because they weren't comfortable with how their data could be used against them, let alone, the selling downstream or, other things that may not be civilly or criminally liable. They started to delete those apps. And that's concerning to me from a couple of different perspectives. The first is, okay, well, now we're losing trust in an industry that is supposed to revolutionize our healthcare. Now it's actually harming us. That's kind of step one. And part of the reason it was harming us is because we as consumers never demanded these heightened privacy and security restrictions before. Now we're coming in and we're starting to demand it, but these companies, they don't have the baseline for it. So they're now having to go and take the time and build it in and, kind of retroactively fit privacy into their products and their apps. So that's kind of, thing one. Thing two is depending on, where you're located, we're seeing disproportionately, certain racial and ethnic minorities deleting the apps, especially in the US with our abortion laws, for instance, those disproportionately impact certain minorities because of where those laws are most restricted and who lives in those states. That then means that these algorithms for the Femtech apps are not getting the representative and diverse data that they need in order to be applicable to everyone that they're trying to serve. So now we're having an imbalance in the types of data that these apps are getting. And then the third thing that concerns me is, especially in the US, after the Dobbs decision, we had an influx of men actually coming onto these apps and flooding them with false data to try to throw, law enforcement and police officers off, with that false data. The problem is a lot of these femtech apps, and more of them are starting to do this, they're partnering with research institutions that are then using this data to bridge that data gender gap and hopefully enhance the data we have on women's healthcare. Well, now we've just flooded it with incorrect data. And not just men doing this, right? Women, there's been a study that shows, 49 to 50% of women have been inputting incorrect data into their apps just because they think the apps are being too personal. They think, oh, I don't need to give you that particular piece of data for you to give me the algorithmic prediction. And so that is going downstream into the data that's going to fuel women's health research long-term.
So I'm hearing if anything, a takeaway for the listeners, advocate for people, like if they're going to start using femtech technology, to go in, with no bias, right? And answer the questions as honestly as they can, because this is like creating a ripple effect into like research and can really hurt us and not help us.
Exactly. And make sure, just do a little bit of upfront research. There are starting to be more and more studies done that show, these are the 10 most data hungry femtech apps, right? Or these are the most data hungry apps in different categories. Take a look at those, just Google, which femtech apps are, safest, or which femtech apps have best privacy practices. And that can give you a sense of where to start, because, oftentimes we go with the ones that we hear about the most, right? Or that our friends are using. And some of those, right, they're larger companies, they have much more revenue. So they're collecting typically more data than they actually need to do the functions. And, we've even seen some companies, especially in the US, get in trouble for their data privacy practices because they're not being transparent or upfront with consumers. So definitely just do a quick search of the company before you download the app to make sure that it's something that you're comfortable giving your data to.
Okay. And so when they're doing their research as a consumer, what are some of like you mentioned a couple of things, right? You can do a little research on which femtech companies are data hungry, right? And so is that a good thing to be data hungry? I don't want to be, ignorant about that, but sometimes when we use that term, it sounds like it's almost desperate, right? But so tell us, what are the things that as a consumer, we should be looking for when we're looking into femtech?
Yes, it's a great question. So first, data hungry, not something that you want from an app, because what it means is they want to collect more and more of your data, and that can then fuel, whatever systems or processes they're doing, but oftentimes they're collecting more data than they need. And one of the things, for data privacy that you want to make sure an app is doing is collecting the minimum data necessary to give you, the functionality of the app. So that's just kind of one thing. Surfshark has some really good studies that they've done on the most data hungry apps, and I'm happy to share those links. Especially, they've done it mostly for like period tracking, ovulation tracking, menstrual tracking apps out there. And, the results are kind of what you would expect. Some of the most data hungry apps are definitely, in North America. And there's some of the larger companies, whereas, something like Apple Cycle, may be a much less data hungry than something like a Flow or Glow or Clue, which is probably what you're hearing about more in the media. So that's just kind of thing one. Thing two to make sure that you're looking at is that the app has some type of medical or scientific backing. And what I mean by that is a lot of these products that are coming on the femtech market right now are in the categories of like wearables or apps, right, or digital products. And because of that, they can often skip under regulatory scrutiny, meaning, they don't have to do things like clinical trials, right, or prove that they're going to be accurate or effective. What we've started to see is a huge accuracy problem in a lot of these femtech apps, where it's almost better not to use them than to use them and get inaccurate predictions. So one of the things that is very startling to me, and it's not just femtech, I don't mean to pick on femtech, love femtech, but we've seen, for instance, period and ovulation tracking apps. There have been studies that, have looked at the top 100 apps. Some have also looked at, the top 100 free apps that are on the market. And they have found that a lot of them are based on scientific and medical methodologies that have been disproven since like the 1930s, or that the best accuracy rate is like 21%, or that none of the apps could accurately predict ovulation. And so that's not just, happening in a few apps here and there. That's hundreds of apps that are being looked at. There's a fantastic organization that has actually looked at almost like 600 to 800 apps, and they found that about 85% of them do not meet clinical accuracy thresholds for them to be able to recommend. So because of that, I always say, take a look and see, does this company have a medical advisory board? Is there some type of physician or scientist, right, or researcher who's involved in these applications or in this company? A lot of companies do not have, like a clinician or a researcher involved. There's nothing to stop, you, Wendy, me, from going and creating a femtech company with no medical background.
Yeah.
And so because of that, look and see, if they're being transparent about the methodologies that they're using. Look and see if there's any kind of, scientific backing for what they're doing. See if they've got clinicians involved. The other thing too is a lot of women are using femtech apps because they want more control and more understanding over their bodies. Mm-hmm. But right, let's say that you get some really cool data from your app and you want to take it to your physician and have your physician look at it or incorporate it into the care plan. The problem is a lot of physicians don't know how these apps have been vetted. They're not familiar with them. They don't know, like, oh, is this something that is going to be legitimate data? So they actually are not typically using the data from those consumer wearables and apps. So the other thing to do is potentially talk to your clinician and say, hey, you know what? Have you heard of any really good apps here, that you would trust or that you would recommend? Because oftentimes if other clinicians are involved in apps, they'll know about it, that word of mouth will get around. So ask your clinician, sometimes, and a lot of times they may not know because they may not be as familiar with femtech since it is new, but they may have some good recommendations.
Wow, that's so much, right? I wrote down Furvious, I was going crazy. You can see that I was taking notes, but you referenced Surfshark as a tool that the consumer can use to sort of help them vet some of these femtech companies, right?
Yes.
And so you also mentioned do a little bit of research and see if they have a medical advisory board or a medical tech company or or research behind them, right? Yeah. So how would a consumer find that information?
Yeah. So for instance, if you want to see if a company has a medical advisory board, I typically Google the company, I go on their website and I look at who's on their team. And so typically they'll have, a contact us or about us section. And somewhere within there, they will have their team members listed. And I take a look and I say, okay, of your, 4 or 5 top people that you've listed, are any of them scientists or any of them doctors? Oh, no, they're not. Okay, well, that shows me that you're not valuing potentially, the medical insights that you can get, or that instead you're prioritizing the tech, right? Or the monetization. Sometimes I'll see, the top people in a company be like, the CEO, the chief innovation officer, the chief product officer, but not, what about chief medical officer? What about a chief scientific officer? Who is filling that role? If they're down at the bottom of the list or somebody who's more of a consultant, that's telling me that this company may not be prioritizing the medical aspects that you need as a consumer. What I've also seen companies do is maybe they may have a full, robust medical advisory board. And that's very appealing to me because it means that they're getting insights from a lot of different disciplines to help fuel their product. So even if they don't have, a chief medical officer or a different, physician or scientist in those top couple of roles, I scroll down and I see, okay, what's their advisory board? Do they have one? And the thing to be careful there, though, with advisory boards only is a lot of companies have them and they're, kind of for show only. And so that's one of the things too, I've worked with companies that say they have these great advisory boards and these top people and names that you would recognize. And I say, great, how often are you meeting? Well, only as needed. Okay, have you actually had a conversation with that person beyond like your initial product pitch? Well, no, but they're on our advisory board. And that's concerning, right? Because that's a bit of a misrepresentation to consumers and to the public. So I want to make sure when I'm looking that I'm not looking for like those big names, right? Like a Bill Gates or Melinda Gates, right? On those advisory boards. Those are usually kind of red flags. I want to make sure I'm seeing actual, doctors, scientists, people who are on the ground. And that makes me feel a bit better that potentially there's some medical backing there.
That's amazing advice, actually, because you're right. Sometimes we can be distracted by titles or by, well-known individuals. And then the last thing you mentioned was like, speak to your clinician, right? Or your physician and get advice from them or recommendations. I think that's a great indicator too of how much awareness that they have around Femtech as well.
And that's very true. And I will say, there hasn't been a ton of awareness around Femtech. I have spoken, I've got a ton of physician friends, and I've spoken to OBGYNs, and I said, so what's your take on Femtech? And they're like, what's Femtech? I'm like, well, this is your industry, like you're an OBGYN, you're a reproductive endocrinologist. Like, why haven't you heard of this? And that to me signifies kind of a bigger gap that we do have between tech founders and clinicians. And so it's not that clinicians don't want to be involved in this field, right? Or that there's some big argument, right, between tech and medicus. And, that's not true. It just means that this is a new industry. A lot of physicians aren't familiar with it. And so that's really what we're trying to do too at Feminnovation is bridge that gap, because we want to have those scientifically accurate products that clinicians can use without feeling like there's data overload. So don't feel at all, like you can't trust Femtech if your clinician doesn't know about it. A lot of clinicians don't, but we are starting to see more clinician adoption.
And that's amazing. So like if someone didn't catch that, like if you are a clinician, a physician, like this is what you do, Bethany. This is what your company does, right? It helps educate physicians and clinicians as well so that they can help their patients, really, right? They're women, they're female patients. Okay. So I'm really curious, right? We've talked a lot about Femtech, and like, to be quite honest, like I was aware of the applications, but I didn't even know it was called Femtech, right? Like, you have your Apple Health on your watch and all the things. So what are the top 3 to 5 Femtech trends right now that like our listeners should know about?
Yeah. So Femtech, just to kind of give you a history, historically has been very much in the reproductive healthcare space or the maternal healthcare space. Part of the reason for that was that those were the apps that were easiest to get on the market fast because you could slide under, regulatory scrutiny. And those were the things that were easy to get consumer adoption. Things like menstrual cycle apps, those are like one of the top 4 apps that teenagers today are using. So that's kind of where this industry started, was more reproductive, ovulation, menstrual, maternal health. And what we're starting to see now, which I get really excited about, is movement away from the conflation of women's health with reproductive health and movement into more chronic care illnesses or women's health issues beyond reproductive health issues or years. So for instance, one of the key trends that we've started to see since about 2022 has been an emphasis on menopause and longevity. That's really exciting. If you Google that, that's kind of like the thing in Femtech right now. We're seeing menopause solutions in the form of telemedicine companies dedicated to menopause coming on the market, new apps and wearables and medical devices to deal with things like hot flashes, new drug developments to also deal with hot flashes or the symptoms of menopause. And so we're starting to see a lot of those products come on the market, which is super exciting. The other trends that I'm starting to see are also a movement into things like cancer. Those have taken a while to kind of gain steam in Femtech. And it's not because people aren't interested in it, but it's because of the long timetable that it has to bring a product like that to life because of all the regulatory hurdles that it has to go through. So one of the really cool companies that's out there right now is AOA DX in this space. And they're trying to build almost like a blood test for ovarian cancer because there's no, early detection system for ovarian cancer. And so they're innovating in this space. There's another company that's trying to actually get kind of like a device that women can use to do their monthly self breast exams that would actually use AI to examine the tissue and tell you if there's been tissue changes, right? Or if there's a lump there that maybe you're not feeling. So all of those things that are coming onto the market are really exciting to me because we're pushing past women's health as just reproductive health, right? We're now looking at these more chronic care conditions or things that are actually going to meaningfully impact how much we're spending on healthcare if we can catch them early or fix them early. The other trend that we're seeing is towards uterine health, and specifically things like fibroids or, different types of IUDs that can be implanted into women that are, not going to hurt women. It's just surprising to me, the statistics of how many women, get an IUD and it doesn't fit, right? Or there's, excess pain or, perforates. There's a company out there, Ocon, that's really trying to innovate in that space. And they're doing it not only in like an IUD form, but also in an IUD that could potentially in the future release different medicines or chemicals into the uterus to treat other harmful conditions. So I think that we're starting to see much more in terms of like products that are actually going to meaningfully help women's healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot, right? Like, I mean, just from my point of view, like just recognizing, women in menopause, right? So I'm in that, well, I think I'm over the hump there now, but, going through that without any, you're right. You don't want to go to your doctor because you just feel like it is part of life, right? So you kind of put how you're feeling on the back burner. And there are things that come with menopause, just from my personal experience, that I didn't even know were going to happen. Like the aches and the pains, right? The things that if you treat it through physio or through other, I guess, modalities, you can really get through to the other side and feel really good. And you don't have to suffer. But I'm really excited about the other things that you shared, like monthly breast exams, right? I mean, that's something that, as women, I would say, I'm not going to broad stroke us, but some of us are really great at it. And some of us just aren't, right? We count on those, like, those, oh my gosh, the mammograms, right? We count on our mammograms to sort of catch it, but there's so much more that we can do. And if we have an app that to help us with that, and ovarian issues, ovarian cancer, like that is such you're right. It's you don't hear about it very often, right?
No, and when it is caught, it's stage 4, right? And there's nothing you can do. We don't have early detection. It's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh. Like, it's so exciting. Like, now you've got me all like intrigued. So I'm getting on the old Google machine after this as well, Bethany, because I feel like I'm so undereducated when it comes to Femtech, and how it can help me as the consumer, right? And how it can help me in preventative healthcare as well. I mean, we're very fortunate in Canada to have like our healthcare funded, but I know in the States, it is not that way. So if you can get ahead of some of these things and be preventative, it can really help you financially as well.
Hugely. And not just you financially, right? But the entire economy.
Yeah.
For instance, one of the really cool companies that I've also seen coming into this space is ultrasound AI. And they're actually trying to combat the problem of preterm births, which can cost, just in the US, $30 billion a year alone. And here's the thing, like 50% of women don't have those, red flags that their OBGYN would say, okay, you're going to be high risk. But they're actually using AI to train algorithms, train their products to, when you do that ultrasound, it gets fed through their machine, and that machine can work with any ultrasound, tech that's out there, and can actually flag who could be high risk before an OBGYN, right, or a human would even know that. And then that can lead to much earlier interventions. And the thing I love about them is they're trying to make it so that, any nation, any company can access this tech regardless of ability to pay. So we've got really good companies out there like that are trying to tackle these problems. Some do it through the direct to consumer route, like those apps and wearables. Others, like Ultrasound AI, are doing it, kind of business to business by working with the OBGYN clinics. We've got so many different products like that are coming to the market. I'm really excited to see where we go.
Oh, wow. I'm excited. I'm so glad I have you on my podcast today because I'm just excited to share all this information with the listeners. Because we really just don't talk about it enough. So, so let's talk about perception, right? Because I think there's a perception or fear out there around femtech or around innovation and all of those things. So what can we do to change our perceptions or fears to lean into the innovation, right? Or develop, I guess, for companies too, right? To develop an entrepreneurial mindset around femtech.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think like the first thing that we can do is talk about our women's health issues, because there's been so much stigma, so much taboo associated with discussions of women's health. We've been pushed into the private sphere, right? We're told not to talk about it, to the point where a lot of women even feel uncomfortable talking to their doctors about what's happening, with their reproductive healthcare or just healthcare issues in general. And so the first thing that we have to do is start bringing those conversations to the public space, because only by doing that can we really push women's health to the forefront and make it so that it's something that, male VCs aren't going to, squirm at whenever they hear, a femtech founder pitching. So that's kind of the first thing, is we've just got to break down the societal stigmas and taboos. The second thing is really, for us as consumers, making sure that, this is technology that can enhance and revolutionize women's health, but only if it's something that we trust and that we're going to support with our dollars. I was at a conference last month, and one of the themes that I heard consistently from major companies in the femtech space was, okay, this is great, my product's on the shelf, but consumers are still going to the male created product that's been there, so much longer than my product, because that's what they know. That's been on the shelves for years. That's just what they're familiar with. And so they aren't taking the time to explore those new products that are coming from femtech companies that may actually be much better suited to their healthcare concerns, right, or to their needs. And because of that, then the women's companies aren't getting the consumer revenue that they need, right? And then it's like, well, as an investor, why am I going to start innovating and supporting innovation in a space where we have a longstanding product that seems okay, even though it's not great, right? It's doing the job. So that's kind of the second thing, is we vote with our dollars. And so if we want more femtech innovation, we want to continue to see femtech progress into, chronic care conditions, cardiology, cancers, we've got to be voting with our dollars and supporting femtech products. Now, that also means that we need to demand from femtech products and those companies what's going to make us comfortable, what we want to see, and, the privacy and the security protections that we deserve. And then kind of from the company perspective, we've started to see more companies embracing things like menstrual leave. I haven't seen a ton supporting menopause leave yet, or, things like that. But as consumers, kind of the more that we demand of our companies for our, the different types of healthcare solutions that are on the market, what we want to see as women from healthcare from companies through their healthcare programs that can support us, that's kind of where a lot of change, especially in the US, is being driven. Because once we get adoption by companies to add these different types of healthcare solutions, whether it's we want fertility support, we want menstrual leave. Once we get that adoption from companies, that's going to bring a lot of the innovations that are on the market to the forefront for consumers, because then we'll have much easier access through our healthcare system.
Exactly. And I think too, what I'm hearing, like you said, you vote with your dollars, but you also vote with your questions, right?
Yeah.
Asking the right questions of your local MPs, as we would call them in Canada, like provincially for us, I'm sure by state in the US, to get a better understanding of what their knowledge base is. And because a lot of that can be funded through our tax dollars as well. Right?
Exactly. And then continuing to push for reimbursement for the new technologies that come on the market. That's kind of been, in the US, especially, one of the barriers that we have to more women's health companies coming on the market is well, digital therapeutics, right, or remote patient monitoring, all that's still new and how it's being reimbursed through the healthcare companies and health insurers. So we've got, advocacy, a lot of attorneys, a lot of politicians, companies advocating for different changes in reimbursement methodologies to make those innovations worthwhile as well.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I think that's another thing. I mean, we have a lot of voices, right? A lot of female voices out there who can really make a difference with that. And I like that you're saying, like, it's really over to us too, to educate ourselves too. What is available, what is supported by our politicians, by our local government, by our provincial or state governments, and really ask the right questions.
And here's the thing too, as women, I don't think we necessarily realize the amount of power that we do have. We make 80% of healthcare purchasing decisions. Huge, right? Like, we are the market. We are more than 50% of the population. We make almost all of the healthcare decisions. We're the market. Femtech is still being called niche. How can you call something niche if we're more than 50% of the population? And so I think it's really time for us to just own that power that we do have, not give into the societal pressure to be less than we are or accept less than what we deserve. And then there's the other thing that has to change too, is kind of how social media or advertising companies are regulating these products. That's kind of the other concern I've heard, especially from femtech founders, is they're like, I've got this great product, but maybe it's mentioning something about reproductive health care, right? Or actual anatomically correct terms. Oh, great, now my account is banned because I'm trying to advertise my product. Whereas, you can advertise Viagra, right? Or things like that for men on, social media, TV, et cetera. But you can't advertise a product that could potentially change a woman's life, even though there's nothing sexual or inappropriate about it. So that's the other thing that has to change, is how we're able to advertise these products to consumers so that they actually know about them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I would have never even thought that was a consideration, but you are correct. On social media platforms, there are certain terminologies that are banned and will get you blocked, right?
Yes.
And so I'm sure that's something that you do as an attorney, is to really work on that, to open up those, I'm going to say, open up the gates, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's other organizations out there that are working on this precise topic. The Center for Intimacy Justice is one. They've done a huge survey, and they found that almost 100% of femtech founders have either had their ads, denied, their accounts blocked, or they're being forced to use things like fruit to depict women's anatomy because of the different algorithms. So they're really working with Facebook, with the different types of social media companies to try to get those policy changes. But it's definitely something that is slow moving.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, anything new, right? It takes time. It's like turning an aircraft carrier. It takes time to turn that big ship.
Yes.
But once you get it on course, that's where you gain all the momentum.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I know that you also help digital founders and people, Femtech companies as well. So if there's any listeners out there that are, starting to kind of dive into that pool, what are some of the mistakes that Femtech or digital health founders make, and how can they avoid them?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. There's a couple of common mistakes that we see. The first one is not properly vetting your product before you're taking it to market. A lot of founders get into the femtech space because they've had their own personal experience. Unfortunately, with the healthcare system, with an illness or a disease, and they don't want other, women to have to go through that. And so they develop a product that they wish that they had as they were going through their healthcare journey. The problem is sometimes there's a mismatch between what they create and what others in that situation would be expecting or need, or what their pain points are. And so that's oftentimes, one thing that we see is, you're so passionate about an idea, right, or a topic that you think this is it. But you still need to vet it to make sure that your downstream users are going to absolutely agree with you. The other thing that we see is companies not doing competitive market analyses early enough. So they build their product, right? They're ready to go. They're ready to get funding. And then all of a sudden, they're getting asked by VCs, well, how's your product different than these other 10 that are out there? Oh, I didn't know those other 10 were out there. And so really kind of at the start, diving into a competitive market analysis, making sure that you can adequately explain how your product is different, because that's what venture capitalists are looking for right now. That was another huge theme at the conference I went to, is differentiation. How's your product building upon what's already out there? Because if you're not differentiating in a way that's going to be meaningful to consumers, you're not going to be able to capture the market share that's already gone. So making sure you're doing that competitive market analysis, making sure as well, as we talked about before, right, that you're incorporating medical and scientifically valid, methodologies into your products, making sure that you're also testing on a diverse group of users. That's another key issue that I see, not just with Femtech, but with health tech in general, is making sure that you're able to get a diverse group of testers during your early phases so that you can make sure your algorithm's being trained properly on that diverse data. And it can also help with the design decisions that you're making. A lot of companies in Femtech came out, especially during the early years, without testing their products with the LGBTQ communities. And what they found were that a lot of their design assumptions were actually very alienating to that community. And there was huge uproar, right? All of that could have been avoided if they had tested with that diverse audience. So making sure that you're prioritizing diversity and inclusivity with your audience, so that you don't have those, different experiences that are going to be alienating. So that's just some of, the common mistakes that we see. There's obviously, early legal mistakes that companies make, for instance, right? Making sure that you're protecting your IP, that you have those non-disclosure agreements in place before you're disclosing your product, making sure that you've got the appropriate IP transfer provisions for whoever's working to build your product so that you can own it. That's something that venture capitalists are definitely going to be looking for.
And that's where you come in, right? Because that's your area of expertise. Because I think there is such a mentality to sprint to market, if you know what I'm saying, like being in the sprint, especially in the tech world, that you can't skip those legal things that you need to build in the background, right? So
absolutely.
And I think you touched on it. Is there anything else a lawyer can bring to the table when if there's a company out there who wants to launch a Femtech product?
Oh, hugely. It's interesting. When I first became a lawyer, I never thought I would actually have to sell legal services. I thought it would be very obvious why you need a lawyer. I can tell you with a lot of Femtech companies that are out there, lawyers are the last people that they want to see. They want to focus on getting that product to market, right? Making money, getting that venture capital in the door. So legal is usually not top of their mind. Here's the reason you need it, right? If you set up your company wrong, that's going to impact whether or not investors are willing to even look at you. If you don't have your IP protected, investors aren't going to invest in your product. If you, for instance, are not doing the privacy and the security from the outset, investors are less likely to want to, actually invest in your product, especially if there are companies that are doing it right. The other thing that a lawyer can really help with that oftentimes gets missed when founders are coming on the market is we're actually very valuable when you're building your minimum viable business product. Because here's the thing, there's so many healthcare laws depending on where you're located, healthcare, privacy, just general consumer laws. And you might be building a company or a product that's not scalable, or that would violate a law. Or you might say, you know what, I'm building this product and I want to partner, my business model is based on partnering with these 10 organizations. And we can say, you know what, that's great, but here's the fraud and abuse laws you're going to run afoul of with that model. And a lot of times companies don't think about that. And so they're trying to build and they're trying to scale. I've worked, for instance, with companies in Europe who build a model one way in Europe because that's where they're allowed to build it under those laws, right? Same with Israeli companies that I've worked with, and they want to come in the US, right? Because the US has, kind of the largest Femtech market right now. And I say, that's great, but it's going to take you 6 to 8 months to completely revamp your structure because that structure is not allowed in the US. Here's all the laws that it's going to violate. And that can really slow companies down. And similarly, for companies, let's say that they don't have to comply with stringent privacy protections at first, but they want to partner with a hospital or healthcare organization, those restrictions can be contractually imposed. And I've seen deals stall for 6 to 8 months because you've got to go back then and build that privacy structure. So we can really help you with that minimum viable business model, and also making sure we're saying, okay, that's great, right? You're going to go fundraise, you're going to go do XYZ. Whenever you're 6 to 8 months out from thinking about partnering with these types of institutions, let us know, because here's the things you're going to have to do. And we can kind of set that roadmap for you.
So it actually increases their ability to get to market in a straighter through line, right? Like it makes make sense to do the homework. And again, we've talked about so much on this podcast, Bethany, but as a recap, right, of what you do with Feminovation, I'm really having a hard time with that, but it's really about you serve a diverse audience, right? You help founders, you help clinicians, you help politicians and advocates. Yes. And so if this is resonating with anyone who's listening today, first and foremost, where can my listeners find you? And I know I will put links in the show notes as well, but where can they find you?
Yeah, so they can find us at feminnovation.com. So that's feminnovation.com. They can find me at bethanycorbin.com. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. So I'm on linkedin.com/in/Bethany Corbin. And then I've started an Instagram, super new for me. I'm like an old granny on there, but I am there. You can find me at Femtech Lawyer.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I know you're going to send me all those links so that we can share it with the listeners. But Bethany, holy cow, man, I don't know about my listeners, but I learned a ton today. If nothing else, I'm taking away that I need to be my own advocate, right? I need to do my own research and be really mindful of how Femtech can really help me through my health journey. And I'm hoping that's resonating with my listeners as well, because we need to own. Right? We need to take ownership of how we're feeling. We need to be more vocal with our clinicians and our doctors. Here we would call them physicians. And, we're our best advocates, right? When it comes to these things. And there's so much to unpack from this podcast, but I'll make sure that I include some of the things that you talked about, like Surfshark. I thought that was a really good one, that link to do some research on behalf of ourselves. So, wow, I can't thank you enough for joining me today, Bethany. It was awesome. Awesome. And I'm so glad that I can share this out into the world, right? And share where we're going with Femtech and how we can be taking care of ourselves in such a more mindful and purposeful way.
Exactly. Thank you, Wendy. This has been so great. Always happy to talk about Femtech because, I think it is the future, regardless of how, we individually feel about apps and in the digital health. That's where we're going. And as women, if we own our power, I think we have the ability to really shape where Femtech goes and really change the course of history that's left women excluded. So really excited to see us come together.
That is a mic drop moment right there, Bethany. So thank you so much. And for my listeners, thanks again for joining us on the Living Life with Wendy podcast. Now go out and be your best cheerleader and advocate. Thanks for joining us today.